My name is Eva Ashworth, and despite everything I've achieved, I was never good enough for my family, but that night, everything changed. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from and hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to walk away from someone who refused to see your worth. I'm 32 years old, and I'm the Chief Investment Officer at Meridian Capital Partners in Charleston, South Carolina. Yes, that Charleston, the one with the historic mansions and old money families who think bloodlines matter more than bank accounts. I manage a portfolio worth over $2 billion, and I've never lost a client a penny, but to my father, Theodore Ashworth. I was still just the daughter who chose numbers over marriage, career over children, independence over his version of respectability. The Ashworth family has been in Charleston for 6 generations. We own 3 historic properties downtown, a summer estate on Kiowa Island, and enough social influence to make or break reputations with a single dinner party invitation. My father built his reputation on real estate development and political connections, but his true talent was making people feel small, especially me. Growing up, I was the only child who questioned his decisions, while my older brother Marcus followed the family path: business degree, country club membership, marriage to a debutante. I went to MIT, then Harvard Business School, then carved my own path in finance. Every achievement was met with the same response. That's nice, dear, but when are you going to settle down and give us grandchildren? The breaking point came 3 months ago, during what was supposed to be a celebration of my father's 70th birthday. Mother had planned an intimate dinner for 25 guests at our family estate on McGarry Street. The guest list read, like a who's who of Charleston society: the Middletons, the Ravenels, the Pinkneys, and of course, the Whitakers, whose son David had been my father's choice for my husband since we were teenagers. I had spent weeks planning my gift for Dad. Not just any gift. I had acquired something I knew would mean everything to him. Through my connections at Meridian, I had tracked down and purchased the original 1847 deed to our family's first property in Charleston. The document had been lost for over a century, and I found it in a private collection in New York. The dealer wanted $200,000 for it. I didn't hesitate the night of the dinner. I arrived early to help Mother with the final preparations. The house looked magnificent, antique silver gleaming under crystal chandeliers, fresh magnolia blossoms arranged in every room, and the dining room table set with our finest china. Mother had outdone herself, but I could see the stress in her eyes. "Your father's been difficult all week," she whispered to me in the kitchen. "He's upset about the merger falling through with the Whitaker Group. He's taking it personally." I should have known then that the evening would be about more than birthday celebrations. Father had been trying to arrange a business partnership with David Whitaker's family for months, and I suspected my romantic life was part of the negotiation. As guests began arriving, I noticed Father's demeanor. He was charming as always, but there was something calculating in his eyes. When David Whitaker walked in, tall, blonde, perfectly groomed in his seersucker suit, Father's smile became genuine for the first time all evening. "Eva, darling." Father announced loudly enough for half the room to hear, "Look who's here." "David was just telling you about his new position at Whitaker Holdings. Senior Vice President at 29. Now that's impressive." David smiled that practiced smile I remembered from countless forced encounters. "Hello, Eva. You look beautiful as always." I forced a smile in return. "Thank you, David. Congratulations on your promotion." What followed was an hour of subtle manipulation. Father kept steering conversations toward David's accomplishments, our shared history, and pointed questions about my personal life. When Mrs. Pinkney asked about my work, Father interrupted before I could answer. "Ava's always been ambitious," he said with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "But we're hoping she'd find time for more important things soon. A woman needs balance, you know." The first course was served, and I decided it was time to present my gift. I had the deed beautifully framed and wrapped in handmade paper from a shop on King Street. As Father opened it, I watched his face transform. From polite interest to genuine shock. "My God," he breathed, holding the document up to the light. "Is this real?" "Completely authentic," I said, finally feeling like I had his full attention. I had it verified by 3 different historians. It's the original deed to the Warehouse District property. The one great-great-grandfather bought in 1847. I thought, you'd want it for your office. For a moment, Father looked at me with something that might have been pride. The other guests murmured their appreciation. Examining the document as it was passed around the table, Mrs. Middleton called it, absolutely. Fascinating. And Judge Ravenel pronounced it a treasure of Charleston history. But then Father's expression shifted. He looked at the deed again, then at me, then at David, and I saw the calculation return to his eyes. This is lovely, Eva, he said, setting the frame aside. Though I have to wonder about the expense, too. $100,000 could have been put to better use. The table fell silent. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. How do you know what I paid for it? I have my sources, Father replied smoothly. And my concerns. A single woman spending that kind of money on a gift when she should be thinking about her future, it shows a lack of judgment. David leaned forward. Perfectly on cue, your father's. Right to be concerned, Eva. Financial responsibility is important in a marriage. A wife should discuss major purchases with her husband. I'm not married, I said quietly, but the words felt hollow in the suddenly thick air. Not yet, Father said, standing and raising his wine glass. But I'm hoping that will change soon, David. Would you like to share your good news? I watched in horror as David stood, reached into his jacket pocket, and pulled out a small velvet box. The entire table erupted in whispers and excited gasps. Mother's hand flew to her mouth. Eva, David said, moving toward me. I know this is sudden, but your father and I have been talking. I think it's time we make our relationship official. I stared at the ring box, then at Father's expectant face, then at the 23 other guests who were watching this nightmare unfold like... It was dinner theater, the room was spinning, but my voice came out steady and clear. No. David's smile faltered. What? I said no. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I'm not going to marry you, David. We haven't even dated since college. And that was a disaster. I'm not going to marry you to seal some business deal for my father. The silence was deafening. Father's face had gone from expectant to thunderous in seconds. Eva, he said in a voice I remembered from childhood, the one that meant I was about to be punished. You're being dramatic. David is offering you a future. A real future, not this career fantasy you've been chasing. Career fantasy? I felt something break inside me. I manage $2 billion in assets. I've built something real, something I'm proud of. This isn't a fantasy, it's my life. It's not enough, Father said, and those 4 words hit me like a physical blow. You're 32 years old, Eva. You have no husband, no children, no real legacy. David is offering you a chance to be part of something meaningful. I looked around the table at these people I'd known my entire life. Some looked uncomfortable, others fascinated by the drama, but not one person spoke up for me. Not even Mother, who sat frozen with her napkin pressed to her lips. Get out, Father said quietly. What? You heard me. If you can't show respect for this family and this opportunity, then you can leave. You're embarrassing yourself and embarrassing us. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle over me. Then I reached for the framed deed, my gift, my gesture of love and respect, and picked it up. If I'm such an embarrassment, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room, then you won't want this reminder of me. I walked to the massive stone fireplace at the end of the dining room, where a fire was crackling softly. Before anyone could stop me, I threw the frame into the flames. The glass shattered, and I watched $200,000 and months of careful planning turn to ash. The gasps and exclamations from the guests barely registered. I turned back to the table, picked up my purse, and walked toward the door. But I stopped at Father's chair and leaned down to whisper in his ear. You want to know about legacy, Dad? Ask me about that in 6 months. I left through the front door, walking past the valet and into the warm Charleston evening. My hands were shaking as I called my driver, but my mind was crystal clear. I'd been humiliated, dismissed, and cast out of my own family, but I wasn't broken. I was angry, and in my line of work, anger was a powerful tool when properly channeled. The next morning, I was in my office at Meridian Capital by 6 a.m. I had work to do, and it wasn't just managing portfolios. I spent the weekend researching, making calls and putting together what I privately called the Ashworth file. By Monday, I had a complete picture of my father's financial empire, and it was more fragile than anyone realized. Theodore Ashworth's wealth was built on real estate, but most of it was leveraged. He owned properties worth about $12 million, but he owed nearly $8 million on various mortgages and loans. His monthly cash flow was tight, dependent on rental income from his commercial properties and returns from his investment portfolio. That portfolio, I discovered, was managed by a firm called Palmetto Wealth Management, a company I had never heard of, which meant they were either very small or very bad at their job. I made a few calls to contacts in the Charleston financial community. Palmetto Wealth Management was both small and struggling. They had been hemorrhaging clients for months, and their investment strategies were conservative to the point of being stagnant. Father's portfolio, worth about $4 million, was earning less than 2% annually in a market where my clients were seeing 12% returns. But that wasn't the most interesting thing I discovered. The most interesting thing was that father had been quietly shopping for a new financial advisor. He'd had preliminary meetings with 3 different firms, including Meridian Capital. My own company had been courting my father as a potential client, and I'd been completely unaware of it. I requested the file from our business development team. Father had been in talks with my colleague James Patterson about moving his portfolio to Meridian. The preliminary proposal showed potential returns of 10 to 15% annually, which would increase father's income by over $200,000 per year. But there was one problem. The minimum portfolio size for Meridian's private wealth management services was $5 million. Father's portfolio was worth $4 million, which meant he would need to bring in additional assets or cash to meet our requirements. I spent the next week putting together a comprehensive analysis of father's finances, his investment needs, and a custom portfolio strategy that would maximize his returns. It was some of the best work I'd ever done. The kind of analysis that would typically cost a client $50,000 just for the consultation. Then I scheduled a meeting with James Patterson. "I understand you've been working with Theodore Ashworth," I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. James nodded. "Potential client, good referral from the Middleton family. His portfolio is just under our minimum, but we're considering making an exception given his social connections." "I don't think that's a good idea," I said, sliding the analysis across his desk. "I've done a deep dive on his finances. His real estate holdings are over-leveraged. His cash flow is inconsistent, and his current investment strategy is producing below market returns. He needs our help, but he's not ready to be a Meridian client." James flipped through the pages, his eyebrows rising as he absorbed the information. "This is incredibly thorough. How did you put this together so quickly?" "I know the client," I said simply, "and I know Charleston real estate. Theodore Ashworth presents well, but he's not as stable as he appears. If we take him on and he can't maintain the minimum portfolio size, it reflects poorly on our screening process. What do you recommend?" I had been planning this moment for days. "I recommend we decline to take him on as a client. Instead, we should suggest he work with a firm that specializes in smaller portfolios, someone like Palmetto Wealth Management." James laughed. "Palmetto? They're falling apart. Half their clients have jumped ship in the past year." "Exactly," I said, "which means they'll be grateful for any business, even if it's not quite profitable. And if Mr. Ashworth is unhappy with the service, he can always come back to us when he's ready to meet our standards." The meeting ended with James agreeing to politely decline father's business. I walked back to my office feeling lighter than I had in weeks. It wasn't revenge exactly. It was just good business sense. But it was also deeply satisfying to know that father's financial future was about to become much more complicated. 2 weeks later, I heard through Charleston's remarkably efficient gossip network that father had been passed over by Meridian. Capital the story, as it reached me through Mother's Bridge Club, was that Meridian had deemed his portfolio insufficient for their standards. In a town where social status was measured in investment account balances, this was a significant blow to Father's reputation, but I wasn't done. The next phase of my plan required patience and perfect timing. I knew Father well enough to predict his next moves. First, he would try to find another prestigious firm to manage his investments. When that failed, and it would fail because I had contacts at every major firm in Charleston, he would become increasingly desperate to improve his financial position. That desperation would lead him to make the kind of risky decisions that had gotten him into this over-leveraged position. In the first place, and when he did, I would be watching. I didn't have to wait long. Within a month, Father had been turned down by 3 more investment firms. The Charleston financial community was small, and word traveled fast. Theodore Ashworth, once considered a stable and profitable client, was now seen as a risk. His portfolio was too small for the big firms and too unstable for the smaller ones. Meanwhile, I heard through family friends that Father's mood had become increasingly dark. He was drinking more at social events, snapping at Mother, and becoming obsessed with the failed merger with the Whitaker Group. David Whitaker, embarrassed by my very public rejection, had made it clear that there would be no business partnership between the families. The final piece of my plan fell into place when I learned that Father was considering selling one of his properties to raise cash. It was a commercial building downtown that he had owned for 15 years, a solid investment that provided steady rental income. But he was considering selling it to fund a new business venture with a group of investors from Atlanta. I knew the building well. It was worth about $2 million, and Father owned it free and clear. If he sold it, he would have the cash to meet Meridian's minimum requirements and salvage his reputation, but he would also lose one of his most reliable income sources. That's when I made my move. I had been researching the Atlanta investors for weeks. They were legitimate businessmen, but their track record was mixed. More importantly, they were looking for local investors who could provide not just capital, but also political connections and social influence. Father's reputation and his position on the Charleston Historic Preservation Board made him attractive to them, though reputations in Charleston were fragile things, and I had been carefully undermining Father's for months. Nothing overt, nothing traceable, just strategic conversations with the right people at the right times. A word here about his financial troubles, a concern there about his judgment, a subtle suggestion that he might not be as stable as he appeared. By the time the Atlanta investors did their due diligence, they found a Charleston businessman who was struggling financially, had been rejected by multiple investment firms, and was facing questions about his business judgment. They politely withdrew their offer. Father was devastated. I learned from Mother that he had been counting on the Atlanta deal to solve his financial problems. Without it, he was stuck with his current investment advisor and his mediocre returns. His dream of joining the ranks of Charleston's truly wealthy families was slipping away. But I wasn't finished. The final act of my plan required one more piece of theater, and I had been saving it for the perfect moment. That moment came 6 months to the day after Father had kicked me out of his birthday dinner. I was working late at my office when I received an unexpected visitor. Father walked into my office without an appointment, looking older and more worn than I remembered. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his face had the grayish pallor of a man under extreme stress. "Eva," he said, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Of course. What can I do for you?" He sat heavily, avoiding my eyes. "I need your help professionally." "I'm listening." For the next 20 minutes, Father laid out his financial situation with painful honesty. The mediocre investment returns, the cash flow problems, the mounting pressure from creditors, the failed business deals. He was facing the possibility of losing everything he had built. "I've been told that you're the best financial advisor in Charleston," he said finally. "I need someone who can turn my portfolio around, someone who understands what's at stake." I leaned back in my chair, studying his face. "Are you asking me to become your financial advisor?" "I'm asking you to help your family," he said, and for the first time, his voice cracked slightly. I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you, but I need you, Eva. The family needs you. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Charleston skyline. The city looked beautiful in the evening light, all historic charm and old money elegance. But I knew the truth about the families behind those mansion walls. Most of them were like father, living on reputation and credit, one bad investment away from disaster. I can help you, I said without turning around. But it will cost you. How much? $200,000. He was quiet for a long moment. That's a lot of money. It's my standard fee for comprehensive financial restructuring, I said, turning back to face him. It's also exactly what I paid for the birthday. Gifty watched me burn. Father's face went pale. Eva, I'm not finished, I said, returning to my chair. The fee is non-negotiable, but there's something else. I want a written apology, a full public apology for your behavior at your birthday dinner. I want you to acknowledge that you were wrong to humiliate me, wrong to dismiss my achievements, and wrong to try to force me into a marriage I didn't want. You can't be serious. I'm very serious. The apology will be published in the Charleston Post and Courier, full page, and you'll read it aloud at the next family gathering. Father stared at me for a long moment. You want me to humiliate myself publicly? I want you to tell the truth publicly, I corrected. There is a difference. And if I refuse? I smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. Then you can continue working with Palmetto Wealth Management. I hear they're very affordable. Father sat in silence for several minutes, his hands clenched in his lap. I could see the war playing out on his face. Pride versus desperation. Stubbornness versus survival. Finally, he looked up at me. What guarantee do I have that you will actually help me? I pulled out a folder from my desk drawer and slid it across to him. I've already done the analysis. Your portfolio can be generating 15% returns within 6 months. Your cash flow problems can be solved within a year. Your real estate holdings can be optimized to reduce your leverage and increase your income. But first, you need to admit that you were wrong. He opened the folder and began reading. I watched his expression change as he absorbed the quality of the work, the depth of the analysis, the clear path forward that I had laid out. It was brilliant work, and we both knew it. This is incredible, he said finally. How long did this take you? 6 months, I said. I've been working on it since the night you kicked me out of dinner. He looked up at me sharply. You planned this. I planned to be ready, I said. I knew you would eventually need my help, and I knew you would be too. Proud to ask for it until you had no other choice. I also knew that when you finally did ask, I wanted to be able to give you exactly what you needed. In exchange for a public apology, in exchange for the truth. I corrected again. You humiliated me in front of Charleston society. You dismissed my achievements and tried to force me into a life I didn't want. You told me I wasn't enough, that my career was a fantasy, that I had no real value. I want you to admit that you were wrong. Father closed the folder and looked at me with something I had never seen before. Respect? You're not the same person who walked out of my birthday dinner. No, I agreed. I'm not. That person still cared what you thought of her. That person still needed your approval. This person knows her worth, and she's not willing to accept anything less. He was quiet. For a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll do it. All of it. All of it, the fee, the apology, the public statement. But I have one condition. What? I want you to come to Sunday dinner next week. The whole family. I want to make this right. I considered his request. Will David Whitaker be there? No. Father said firmly. This is about family. Only family. Then I'll be there. We shook hands across my desk, and Father left with the folder containing his financial future. I sat alone in my office as the sun set over Charleston, feeling a satisfaction I had never experienced before. It wasn't the victory I had imagined 6 months ago. It was better, it was complete. The apology appeared in the Charleston Post and Courier the following Sunday. It was everything I had asked for and more. Father acknowledged his mistakes, praised my achievements, and admitted that he had been wrong to try to control my life. The response from Charleston society was immediate and overwhelming. I received calls, flowers, and invitations from people who had witnessed my humiliation and now wanted to make amends. The Sunday dinner was perfect. Mother had prepared all my favorite dishes, and for the first time in years, the conversation was about my work, my achievements, and my future. Father read the apology aloud to the family, and when he finished, he looked directly at me. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. I should have said that years ago. Marcus, who had been silent through most of the dinner, finally spoke up. "I owe you an apology too. I should have stood up for you at the birthday dinner. I was a coward." "You were protecting yourself," I said. "I understand that. But I hope you understand now that I don't need protecting. I never did." Over the following months, I transformed Father's financial situation exactly as I had promised. His portfolio grew as cash flow improved, and his reputation was restored. But more importantly, our relationship was rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect rather than patriarchal control. The Atlanta investors who had rejected him earlier came back with a new offer, but Father turned them down. He had learned to value stability over risky ventures, and he had learned to trust his daughter's financial judgment over his own ego. David Whitaker tried to reconnect with me several times, but I was no longer interested in men who saw me as a business opportunity rather than a person I was dating. A fellow investment advisor from Savannah, a man who appreciated my intelligence and shared my ambition. The story of my public humiliation and elegant revenge became legendary in Charleston social circles. It was whispered about at garden parties, discussed at book clubs, and retold at family dinners, but the lesson was never about revenge. It was about knowing your worth and refusing to accept anything less. 6 months after that terrible birthday dinner, I found myself hosting my own dinner party. The guest list included Father, Mother, Marcus, and several of Charleston's most prominent business leaders. The conversation was about investments, market trends, and the future of Charleston's economy. I was the expert everyone wanted to hear from, and Father beamed with pride every time someone complimented my insights. As the evening wound down, Father pulled me aside on the terrace overlooking the garden. "I have something for you," he said, handing me a small wrapped package. Inside was a vintage silver pen engraved with the words, "Eva Ashworth Financial Advisor of the Year." It was the award I had won from the Charleston Business Journal, an honor that Father had barely acknowledged when I first received it. "I should have celebrated this properly when it happened," he said. "I should have celebrated you." "You're celebrating me now," I said, and for the first time in months, I felt the warmth of genuine family connection. "I want you to know," Father continued, "that I've rewritten my will. You're inheriting the business, the properties, everything. Marcus will receive a generous trust fund, but the family empire will be yours to run." I looked at him in surprise. "Dad, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he said firmly. "You've proven that you're not just the best financial mind in the family. You're the best financial mind in Charleston. This is where it belongs." We stood together on the terrace, looking out at the city lights. Twinkling beyond the garden, Charleston had been my home, my burden, and my battlefield. Now it was my kingdom, earned not through birthright, but through intelligence, determination, and the courage to demand the respect I deserved. "Have you ever regretted it?" Father asked suddenly, walking away that night. I thought about the question seriously. "I regret that it was necessary," I said finally, "but I don't regret doing it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is know when to walk away. And sometimes the most powerful revenge is becoming so successful that they have to come to you." Father nodded slowly. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see who you really are." "I'm sorry too," I said, "but I'm glad you see it now." As I said goodbye to my guests that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I had been kicked out of a family dinner for refusing to accept a life that wasn't mine. Tonight, I had hosted a dinner where I was the guest of honor, celebrating not just my professional success, but my personal triumph. The transformation hadn't been about revenge, though that's how it started. It had been about recognizing my own worth and refusing to accept anything less than what I deserved. It had been about turning pain into power, humiliation into determination, and rejection into the fuel for extraordinary success. I had learned that sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who understand us least. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give them is the opportunity to see us clearly, not as they want us to be, but as we truly are. The night Father kicked me out of dinner was the night I stopped being his daughter and started being my own woman. The night I stopped seeking his approval and started demanding his respect. The night I stopped accepting crumbs and started expecting the feast. And now, as I stood in my own home, surrounded by the remnants of a perfect evening, I realized that the most elegant revenge wasn't about making them pay for their mistakes. It was about becoming so successful, so undeniably valuable that they couldn't afford to lose you. Father had kicked me out of dinner, but now he couldn't afford to have dinner without me. And that transformation from rejected daughter to indispensable heir was worth more than any apology, any public acknowledgement, any material compensation. It was the revenge of becoming exactly who I was meant to be, regardless of who tried to stop me. But life has a way of testing even the most carefully constructed victories. 3 months after that perfect dinner party, I faced a challenge that would prove whether my transformation was truly complete or just an elaborate performance. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly reports. Mother's voice was shaky, frightened in a way I had never heard before. "Eva, you need to come to the house immediately. Your father, he's had a heart attack." I dropped everything and rushed to Charleston General Hospital, where I found Mother in the cardiac waiting room, still in her gardening clothes, soil under her fingernails. Marcus was there too, pacing and running his hands through his hair. "How bad is it?" I asked, taking Mother's trembling hands in mine. "They don't know yet," Marcus said. "He collapsed in his office this morning. The paramedics said it was a massive coronary event. We waited for 6 hours, 6 hours of stale coffee, uncomfortable chairs, and the terrible silence that comes when you're forced to contemplate losing someone you've just learned to love again. During those hours, I realized something profound. My anger toward Father had been transformed into something else entirely. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding he'd been shaped by his own father's expectations, just as I had been shaped by his. When Dr. Patterson finally emerged from the cardiac unit, his expression was cautiously optimistic. "He's stable," he said, "but he'll need extensive recovery time. The damage to his heart muscle was significant. He's going to need to make major lifestyle changes, diet, exercise, stress management. Most importantly, he needs to eliminate the sources of stress in his life." Over the following weeks, I watched Father struggle with his new reality. The man who had built his identity on control and dominance was now dependent on others for the most basic tasks. He couldn't drive, couldn't work long hours, couldn't even climb the stairs to his home office without becoming winded. But the most difficult adjustment was psychological. Father had always defined himself by his work, his deals, his position in Charleston society. Now he was forced to step back from everything that had given his life meaning. The financial consulting business we had built together was thriving, but he could only participate in limited ways. During his recovery, I spent more time at the family estate than I had in years. Mother needed help managing Father's care, and Marcus was struggling to balance his own business responsibilities with family obligations. For the first time in our adult lives, we were functioning as a true family unit. It was during one of these visits that I discovered something that would change everything I thought I knew about my father. I was organizing his home office, sorting through papers and files to create a more manageable system for his reduced work schedule. In the bottom drawer of his antique desk, I found a manila folder marked Eva in his handwriting. Inside were copies of every article that had ever been written about me, every professional award I had received, every business journal that I'd featured my work. There were newspaper clippings from my college graduation, my Harvard business, school acceptance letter, even a copy of my first business plan from when I was 12 years old and wanted to start a dog walking service. But most surprising were the letters dozens of them, written in Father's careful script but never sent. The first letter was dated from my freshman year at MIT. My dearest Eva, I know you think I don't understand your choice to study engineering, but I want you to know how proud I am of your courage. You're doing something I never had the strength to do, following your own path instead of the one chosen for you. I pray that I'll learn to support you the way you deserve. Another letter from my Harvard graduation. Today I watched you receive your MBA, and I realized that you've become everything I dreamed of being, but never had the courage to pursue. Your intelligence, your determination, your refusal to accept. Limitations, these are gifts that I recognize because I buried them in myself long ago. I hope someday I'll be brave enough to tell you this in person. The most recent letter was dated just 1 week before his heart attack. I've been thinking about the night I asked you to leave my birthday dinner, and I realized it was the night I lost something precious. Not just your respect, but my own. I was so afraid of losing control that I lost what mattered most. You've shown me what real strength looks like, and I'm grateful for the lesson, even though it came at such a high cost. I love you, and I'm proud of you. And I should have said that every day of your life. I sat in his office, surrounded by evidence of a love that had been too complicated, too proud, too afraid to express itself properly. All those years of criticism and control hadn't been about disappointment in me. They had been about his own disappointment in himself. He had seen in me everything he had wanted to be, and instead of celebrating that, he had tried to reshape me into someone smaller, someone who wouldn't make him feel inadequate by comparison. When Father was finally well enough to return to his office, I was waiting for him with the folder. "I found these," I said simply, placing it on his desk. He looked at the folder, then at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw my father cry, not the controlled, dignified tears of a man maintaining his composure, but the raw, broken sobs of someone who had carried a burden too heavy for too long. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, Eva. I wanted to be the father you deserved. But I was too afraid you'd become everything I couldn't be, afraid you'd leave me behind. Afraid you'd see me for what I really was, just a man who inherited his position and never had the courage to earn it." I moved around the desk and held him while he cried. This man who had seemed so powerful and intimidating for so much of my life. In that moment, I understood that the greatest revenge wasn't about humbling him or forcing him to acknowledge my worth. It was about helping him find his own. "You did earn it," I said softly. "Maybe not the way you wanted to, but you built something real. You raised children who are stronger than you were. You created a legacy that will outlast any business deal or social position." "I wasted so much time," he said. "So many years of being afraid instead of being proud." "We both did," I admitted. "But we have time now. We have the rest of our lives to get it right." The months that followed were unlike anything our family had ever experienced. Father's recovery was slow, but steady, and with each passing week, he became more comfortable with his new role as advisor rather than commander. He began sharing stories I had never heard before, about his own father's impossible expectations, about the pressure of maintaining a family reputation, about the loneliness of always having to be in control. More importantly, he began asking questions about my life, my work, my dreams for the future. Not the invasive questions of a controlling parent, but the genuine curiosity of someone who wanted to understand and support the person I'd become. The transformation in our family dynamic was remarkable. Sunday dinners became celebrations of each other's achievements rather than competitions for approval. Marcus began sharing his own struggles with Father's expectations, and we discovered that we had both been fighting the same battles in different ways. Mother, freed from her role as mediator between Father and his children, began to flourish in ways I had never seen before. She returned to painting, a passion she had abandoned decades earlier, and her artwork was displayed in a local gallery. At 72, she was finally pursuing her own dreams instead of managing everyone else's conflicts. The business continued to grow, but now it was truly a family enterprise. Father's experience and connections combined with my financial expertise and Marcus's marketing skills, created a powerhouse that dominated Charleston's wealth management scene. We were no longer competing with each other, we were building something together. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in Father's relationship with the community. His heart attack had been a wake-up call not just about his health, but about his legacy. He began using his influence to support causes he believed in rather than just maintaining his social position. He established a scholarship fund for first-generation college students, donated to women's business organizations, and became a vocal advocate for changing the old boy network that had defined Charleston business for generations. The man who had once dismissed my achievements as career fantasy was now introducing me at business events as the smartest person in the room. The father who had tried to force me into marriage was now proudly telling people that I had chosen to prioritize my career and that he had learned to respect that choice. One evening, almost a year after his heart attack, Father and I were working late at the office, reviewing a particularly complex investment strategy. As we wrapped up our analysis, he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, complete, uncomplicated pride. "You know," he said, "I used to think that having a son meant my legacy was secure, that Marcus would carry on the family name and business. But I realize now that legacy isn't about names or gender or following predetermined paths. It's about excellence, integrity, and the courage to be authentic." It took us both a long time to figure that out. I said, "Yes, but we figured it out together." He replied, "And that's what matters." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point, the woman who had been kicked out of a family dinner for refusing to accept a life that wasn't hers had become the architect of a new family dynamic based on mutual respect and genuine love. The revenge I'd planned so carefully, the systematic undermining of Father's financial security, the public humiliation, the forced apology, had been just the beginning of a much deeper transformation. It had broken down the walls between us, but it had taken love, forgiveness, and time to build something better in their place. I had learned that sometimes the most powerful revenge is not about making someone pay for their mistakes, but about helping them become the person they were meant to be. Father's heart attack had been a medical emergency, but it had also been an emotional awakening that allowed him to finally express the love and pride he had carried in secret for so many years. The night I was kicked out of dinner had been the end of one relationship, the toxic dynamic between a controlling father and a daughter desperate for approval. But it had also been the beginning of something far more valuable, a genuine partnership between two people who had learned to see each other clearly and love each other completely. Sometimes revenge isn't about destruction. Sometimes it's about reconstruction. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't about winning, but about helping everyone involved become their best selves. The father who had once told me I wasn't enough had become my greatest champion. The daughter who had once craved his approval had become his trusted advisor and beloved partner. And the family that had once been fractured by pride and misunderstanding had become something stronger than any of us had imagined possible. That transformation, from broken to whole, from competitor to collaborator, from disappointment to celebration, was worth more than any revenge I could have planned. It was the ultimate victory, not just for me, but for all of us. Have you ever had to choose between peace and family? Sometimes the most powerful revenge is walking away. If my story resonated with you, hit like, subscribe to Silent Revenge, and share your truth in the comments, because sometimes justice whispers and still echoes forever